Alright guys, so here is a mostly step-by-step install of an '01 Cobra independent rear suspension in a 1989 Ford Mustang Foxbody. In this first clip, we are dropping the solid rear axle. We've already previously removed the drive shaft mufflers, tailpipes, disconnected the upper and lower rear control arms, and unbolted the shocks. Although we did not film any of the IRS disassembly or installing of the bushings, Full Tilt Boogie Racing and Maximotorsport.com are both really good places to find information. So here we fully disassembled the IRS. We used Prothane upper and rear control arm bushings, Maxim Motorsport diff cross-access subframe and sway bar bushings, new CV boots, stop deck rotors, power stop calipers, Maxim Motorsport's IRS brake lines for a Foxbody, Timken wheel bearings. Here is a picture of the diff when we took it off and cleaned it. So as you may know, this has a factory 327 rear gear. I retained the factory 327 just for the time being. At some point I will probably go ahead and do a 355 in it, but for the time being I mainly just wanted to get the car on the road, tested, because we have a pretty big show coming up, two big shows coming up, Somerset, Kentucky and Hollyford Fest. Alright, so installing the IRS subframe. So first, use the factory solid rear axle lower control arm mounts for the front of the subframe. However, in a Fox chassis, they are drilled to a 12mm bolt, whereas a S95 and New Edge platform uses a 14mm bolt. So we bought the Maxim Motorsports 14mm bolts, just drilled it out to install it. And as you can see, I'm struggling a little bit here, just getting it perfectly aligned. Other than that, there's essentially 4 bolts that hold it in. There are more, but to hold the base part of the subframe, it's essentially just 4 bolts. Here we're working on installing the rear subframe mounts. You're going to want to retain the factory quad shock hole, and there's an additional hole behind the quad shock hole that doesn't perfectly line up on the plate, but later on in the video I'll show you how we modified it to fit the factory hole, whereas most people just seemingly drill a new hole. However, it's less than an inch away from the factory hole, so you could potentially run into subframe crushing issues, etc. But we just thought it would be best to retain the factory hole, so we just modified the bracket to fit. After we had installed the subframe in the car, we decided just to give everything a good final wash before we started assembling everything. As you can see, the front uh, rear subframe bolt is in there. The rear bolt, we still haven't modified the bracket yet, and as well as the front subframe mounts are in. Like I said, I just ended up washing it with pressure washer and soaked it up. Alright, and here as you can see we're installing the differential. One thing we ran into, and it was a pretty big problem because we had the IRS assembled and we ended up having to drop it back out just to do the brake lines. So be sure you do your brake lines prior to the swap, and I know you can call us out in the comments, but I had ordered brake lines about 2 months prior to this video being made, and they were on back order, so that was like the last piece that showed up was the brake line kit. So just bottom line, be sure you do your brake lines before you do the diff, or else you'll have a pain just trying to fit your hand through there, and it's just not worth it. Here you can see we're modifying the rear subframe bracket. We added a little triangle on to the bottom of the bracket, and here's my dad welding it in. We did this in order to retain the factory hole that was already pre-drilled. It's pretty simple. I've seen a lot of people do this. I wouldn't say a lot, but I've seen some people do this. I'm not saying we invented this idea, but we just figured that this would be the best course of action to take as far as the fifth and sixth hole that the subframe bolts into. Later on in the video, I'll show you how it looks compared to the factory bracket. Here's a picture of how the factory rear subframe bracket looks. As you can see, the rear hole does not line up. So, like I said, rather than just drilling a new hole in the subframe, we decided to just weld us a bracket on, and then drill into the bracket itself to fit the factory hole. And here it is fully assembled. As you can see, I've got my 94-95 Mustang GT tri-bar wheels on. And we took the gas tank out just so we'd have a little bit of extra room, and as well as we wanted to go ahead and do a fuel filter while we were there. So it was just better for us to take it out. So you might not have to if you don't want to do that. It's entirely plausible not to. And although I did not film any of the actual install as far as hooking the axles up and everything when doing the brakes, it's just as simple as everything. And now here is the parking brake. So I didn't film any of this, but I used LMR's 79 to 92 rear disc parking brake kit, and I will link their video in the description. It is super simple, should just take about 20 minutes. I would just refer to it. It's fairly simple, but and so going into this, I knew that my previous exhaust, my previous Bazzani catback would not work. I did not know that the mufflers wouldn't work, but I did know that the tailpipes wouldn't work. So rather than cutting them up, we just went ahead and cut small Flowmasters up, swapped the outlets on them just so it could fit in the IRS, I could drive it. As of recording this video, I have now installed the 2.5 inch Bazzani 99 to 04 Cobra IRS catback. I will show some pictures of that here in this video as well. So I did not film any of the booster slash master cylinder install. It's pretty simple. I just used the LMR 93 Cobra booster and master cylinder, as well as installing the Max Motorsport strut tire bar, new radiator cap, and antenna delete while the car was down, and also while we were waiting on parts. So overall thoughts, very happy with the IRS. It was a pain doing all the research to figure out what would work and what wouldn't work. Had a lot of struggles with everything, but overall I would do it again with another Foxbody if I ever have the opportunity to. The car feels a lot more implanted. Granted, I do feel every single little bump now with it, but it does feel a lot more planted than it did. And like I said, I'm very happy with the overall handling of it. As you can see here now, I have it's only 2.5 inch catback for the IRS. It's got 3.5 inch tips with there's only padded X pipe, high flow cats, BBK shorties, etc. Like I said, overall, I would 100% do it again. Very pleased with it.